for Asian Heritage Month, Amaya Phillips.
Thank you, Ashley. There is a virus going in the world, and I'm not talking about COVID-19. This one ends with an M and begins with the word race. Racism is widespread and lives in our past, present, and future. The world itself is a sickness that fills up a room with headaches whenever it's brought up. For those who have never been affected by it or never had to be affected by it, they do not know all the side effects that it comes with. For one to pass on racist tendencies means that they are quite familiar with the second strand of the disease that is hate. Hate can make people do crazy things just because they had a bad day. It can make people go into a place of peace and turn it into a traumatic event. To say that the words hate and racism aren't synonymous is a lie. While there might not be a cure as of yet, we can work to help these communities who have fallen victim to this disease. With solidarity, we can stand with those who need help getting their voice heard and giving them the proper steps to heal through the process.
Thank you very much. Please give it up for Amaya Phillips from Third World Alliance. We want to remind you that today's event is going to be recorded for those who could not be here with us so that they can access today's event. So want to thank Amaya and Third World Alliance for their support. And now we'd like to invite Dr. Lois Wims, our Provost and Vice President from Academic Affairs.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And I'm really pleased that this session is recorded. For those who did not allow, it seems that it has been a horrendous month for all communities of color, given atmosphere of racism, hate, discrimination. And as our first speaker so eloquently put it, hate and racism at the same time, meaning the same thing. I'm really pleased that the number of faculty and students have come together in this celebration, if you will, of solidarity and standing with all of our communities that are impacted daily in small ways, large ways, and insidious ways, and appreciate that we're taking the time to reflect and to commit and overcommit to fighting this every chance we get. So appreciate the Third World Alliance, the History and Philosophy Department, the Urban Action Institute, and the students for bringing us together today on this really important topic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wims, and for your leadership in being able to support today's event and paving the pathway for many other professionals to have this space. Thank you for that culture. At this time, I'd like to invite Stacy Luster, General Counsel and Assistant to the President. Thank you for being here.
I'm happy to be here and sad to be here, all at the same time. Stop Asian hate. Stop Asian hate. How can we be talking about stopping Asian hate in today's society? We need to stop all hate. We need to stop racism. We need to stop white supremacy. Worcester State has been working to stop hate, stop racism, stop white supremacy since its inception. And yet it persists. And yet it persists. We need to join together as oppressed people and fight against these forces that continue to oppress us and hold us down. President Maloney launched the Worcester State University 5-point plan of action towards a more inclusive campus community several years ago. We have diversity, equity, and inclusion committees, which have always been intended and designed to include all underrepresented points of view and to serve all of our community. But admittedly, I feel that the Asian voice is underrepresented even in those committees. Similarly, I feel the Asian voice is underrepresented on TWA. We need to come together. We need to come together. The federal government has defined racial minorities as being Asian, Black, Hispanic, and Native American. And so the federal government understands that Asians, Black, Hispanics, and Native Americans are underrepresented, entitled to additional protections. But yet it feels to me that we don't realize that we are a group, that we are a cohesive unit that can work together at Worcester State, in our communities, and in this country. Most recently, we've changed the acronym that we typically used at Worcester State of calling ourselves a group of Alana, because we are a group, and we need to act like a group. And so we've been using this term Alana. Most recently, post George Floyd, there's been an increased emphasis on Black lives. So that term has been altered, or is commonly used to be called BIPOC. But BIPOC still includes Asian Americans. And we need to embrace each other and work together so that we can stop racism, stop white supremacy, and create a more inclusive campus community here at Worcester State University. We have a diversity and inclusion strategy that includes all of our committees, such as Campus Climate, Bias Incidence Response Team. Our Affirmative Action Committee is really important because one of our primary goals in our 5-point plan of action is to make sure that we are recruiting diverse faculty and staff to lead Worcester State. And that includes Asian faculty and staff, and in particular in Worcester, Southeast Asian. We really need an increase in Southeast Asian leadership and representation. I am so thrilled that one of my sisters in this work, my sister in this community, Ann Sawyer, is a part of this conversation today, because she's leading the work, she's doing the work. She and I work together as sisters, and I want to work together as sisters and brothers with my Worcester State community to stop hate, stop Asian hate, stop racism, stop white supremacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy, for that message from the president and for an update on all the work that is being done at Worcester State to be able to include each community and then be forward and authentic about it. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you a special guest. She's a student here at Worcester State. She is dynamic and a scholar. She is part of the class of 2024. She's an OMA ambassador, TWA member. She's business administration. And I'd like to introduce you to Vina Lee.
Hi, everyone. Sorry if my ankle's kind of weird, technology issues. In retrospect, it feels very inevitable. With America's long history of discrimination against Asians, the Trump's administration's willingness to use phrases such as Chinese virus and Kung Flu, and easy access to life-ending weapons in America, the shooting on March 16th feels like a culmination of anti-Asian sentiment. The murders of Zhao Jitan, Dao Yufeng, Delana Ashley Yan, Paul Andre Michaels, Hyunjin Grant, Sunja Kim, Soonjung Park, and Yang Aiyue are devastating. And the subsequent days following the shooting, it was frustrating to see more details about the killer rather than the lives lost, reducing them to details of their own deaths. It was even more aggravating seeing Officer Jay Baker's defend the killer. Having a bad day doesn't justify murder, and denying the racial motivations behind the crime when it's clear that the killer specifically chose an area where Asians worked and attacked. His behavior is reminiscent of the recent attacks in areas such as Chinatown, where the elderly have been brutally assaulted. As a Vietnamese American woman, this pandemic has forced me to confront the racism that plagues this country. My family has received strange looks every time we went to a non-Asian grocery store. My mother, who works at a nail salon, comes home and vents to me about how her customers ask her if she's Chinese or telling her to put on a face shield along with a mask because they don't want to get COVID from her. Being a part of Worcester State University's Office of Multicultural Affairs programs, such as OMA ambassadors, TWA, and Upper Bound, has given me the space to be authentically me and allowed me to not face these issues alone, but critically analyze and become more self-aware of the injustices that exist. These programs have allowed me to have a safe space to practice being a scholar and engage in action. I would like to thank OMA and TWA for holding events like these, which are part of the Multicultural Programming Committee that collaborates with many faculty and staff you will hear from today. Please continue to support these spaces. Students are allowed to be Asian, Black, Latino, Native, and affirm who we are as scholars. Thank you, and I ask you to be courageous and encourage and embrace conversations in your classroom around the topic that hits home for us. Don't ignore the topic. We are not imaginary, and our identity is wrapped in with who we are. Thank you for listening.
Wow, Vina, thank you so much. Those words are deeply felt and penetrating. Thank you so much for taking the time out. We know that this is a very busy time for students and appreciate your support and your message. And I hope that we as a community can support and live up to the expectations that our students have for us and want for this campus. So thank you, couldn't be more proud. For those that are interested, for the students on the call, both Amaya and Vina are part of Third World Alliance. There are subcommittees underneath TWA that celebrate the Heritage Months. Black History Month, Latin Heritage, Native American, Asian Heritage, Women History, etc. If you'd like to be a part of those committees, please join TWA. Their meetings are every Tuesdays at 2:30, and they're meeting over Zoom. And they've been putting on a lot of cultural programming this entire year. So please continue to support students' efforts. And for those faculty, if you'd like to also participate and engage with TWA, please feel free to reach out to us. At this time, we'd like to also turn it over to our faculty, the gems of our campus, to be able to share their statements, their experiences, their solidarity with our community. Please welcome Professor Ling Ling Wang from the Business and Administration Department.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Racism against Asian Americans is nothing new to those who have experienced it. But the recent rise in violent crimes against us has ignited deep-rooted fears and drawn national attention. As an Asian, I want to sincerely thank you for bringing this up. We should not be silent amid this deeply concerning and growing national and international trend. I want to address my own Asian community. I know it's not part of our culture, but we have to speak up. Protesting and civil disobedience is not the way we were raised, but we should make ourselves heard. As a community, we draw strength from our diversity. We appreciate our unique qualities and stand together, particularly in times of concern and crisis, and work to eliminate all forms of prejudice and discrimination. We call for people to educate themselves and end the hate. Racism and xenophobia have no place in our community, and these violent crimes must end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Please welcome Professor Wei Xu from the Chemistry Department.
Good morning, everyone. What we have achieved today here is not free. It is because many pioneers have constantly fought for it. I thank you for the leadership, for the schools, for Worcester State to organize this event. And we stand together with our Asian American community in combating the hatred and violence directed at our community, which has escalated during the COVID era and especially last few years. And the fight to end this racism and bias and to foster awareness of justice and justice must be ongoing. As we are speaking right now, at this very moment, hatred and racism cases are still going on. For example, during this past weekend, Illinois Senator proposed a bill, and the intention was to teach the kids Asian history, but they particularly excluded other ethnic groups except Japanese group. And so after many appeals, phone calls, signatures, and calling to the senator's office, the representative office, they agreed to remove that. They agreed to submit the bill to promote all Asian American history education in the high school. So we must have ongoing fight to end the hatred, discrimination, and racism. Thank you for organizing this event.
Thank you so much, especially for that additional information. Please welcome Professor Martin Fromm.
I want to thank Amaya for the introduction and for the really powerful words of Vina earlier. I want to thank also the Office of Multicultural Affairs and Third World Alliance for hosting this event. We're meeting, of course, today in response to the spate of violence and racist hate actions and speech against Asian Americans, culminating, of course, in the shootings in Atlanta, but as Rachel just mentioned, it's ongoing at every level of society. I want to thank the many who supported the statement of solidarity. It's important to make it known where we stand on this issue, the knowledge that the safety, well-being, and thriving of our Asian American community is at the foundation of the thriving of our university community as a whole. It's also important to acknowledge that while the racist, scapegoating political rhetoric that Vina mentioned surrounding COVID has brought it back to the surface in an ugly way, anti-Asian racism and violence is nothing new in this country. It is intricately embedded in the social and cultural fabric of this country's history, emerging with particular salience at times with social and economic anxiety. As mentioned in the statement, the deep historical roots of anti-Asian racism include, but are not limited to, the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, a series of immigration laws that effectively excluded Asian immigration until the mid-1960s, and Japanese internment. I want to say a few words specifically on anti-Chinese exclusion as one piece in the unsightly puzzle of this country's history of anti-Asian racism. During the second half of the 19th century, democratic ideals of self-rule and the political freedom of the individual were paradoxically framed in terms of the exclusion of Asians. Ironically, anti-Asian agitators used depictions of Asian laborers as exploited, servile, indentured, and coolie labor as a justification for excluding them on the premise that they posed a threat to quote unquote free immigrant labor and democratic ideals of individual freedom. This was contrasted with popular depictions of Europeans as pioneering and free. In the long term, these representations have erased Asians from national historical memories of immigration and have privileged instead transatlantic immigration from Europe. This historical precedent is important to understand in light of present day assertions of individual freedom and the protection of American democratic ideals as a cover and justification for anti-Asian and anti-immigrant exclusionary racism. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody else.
Thank you so much. Please welcome Professor Saltman.
Morning, everyone. Thank you to TWA and OMA for organizing this, and thanks to our students for speaking up. Your words are, I take your words to heart. I'm here to stand in solidarity today with our Asian American and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters. But I also want to invite my fellow white brothers and sisters to keep in mind that the history that Martin was sharing is our history, a history of oppression, and that that's something that we often don't keep in mind. We often attribute it, say, well, that's Asian American history. Well, it's our history in particular as white people, and the way that we have defined ourselves as the in a white supremacist terms as a dominant group entitled to privilege and a sense of belonging in this country. And it's not only a history that we need to be aware of, but a history that continues to reinvent itself and that we continue to reproduce, as Martin was alluding. You know, we need to look at the kinds of social class anxieties that we use to explain globalization and arrive at certain understandings of why the world is the way it is, and to look at the broader structures that help us understand that, rather than scapegoating certain groups that we forever identify as foreign or other, but who are in fact members of this national community and society as well. So thanks.
Thank you. Professor Flowers?
Thank you, Lakshmi, and thank you to TWA and OMA for putting this on, and the students of TWA and my colleagues and the faculty for standing in solidarity. In my view, to stand in solidarity requires understanding the nature of the thing against which we are standing in solidarity, and that is, in this context, Asian or anti-Asian American hatred. Now, to understand anti-Asian American hatred, I think we need to look at more recent history of the ways that fear of Asian Americans has been used as a political tool. And here I'm reaching back to the 2008 vice presidential debate, wherein Sarah Palin positioned China as an economic and existential threat to American freedom, vis-a-vis connections with the American deficit, statements she repeated in 2013, and statements which have evolved in our most recent presidential election. Now, when I say evolved in our most recent presidential election, I do not simply mean the numerous references to China and Asian Americans and Asian peoples broadly as the source of the COVID-19 pandemic, but I do mean the constant positioning of China and Asian American communities broadly as existential threats to both American imperialism and American national security through, say, development of artificial intelligence and data mining. Every presidential candidate bought into this rhetoric when discussing national security policy, specifically with regards to data security, which has allowed for the increased kinds of threats that we see in modernity. So when we say that there is a history of anti-Asian sentiment, we need to look at the ways that even we who stand in solidarity or claim to stand in solidarity with the Asian American communities participate in this narrative through the ways that we position and hold accountable Asian communities, Asian communities and other such Asian American organizations. So in order for us to truly stand in solidarity, I think we need to do the hard work of interrogating the ways in which we stand with our Asian American communities and the ways in which we have allowed these narratives to fester and circulate within our own communities, and do the hard work of combating these narratives, even when it's not comfortable and even when it risks social ostracization. So again, thank you to TWA and OMA for putting this event on. Thank you to my faculty and student colleagues for standing in solidarity, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you very much. I am so grateful for the words that I've spoken already and for creating this space, especially addressing representation and the roles of allies and how we can specifically be authentic. Please welcome Professor Lihua Wang. Professor, I think you're muted. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm teaching in sociology, and I like to share with you an experience that happened recently. I talked about the problem of anti-Asian American during the COVID-19. The data showing us against Asian American crime rate has been increased 150% during the pandemic, from March 2020 to March 2021. So my student asked me a question: is it something new? This just happened because of the pandemic or something? So for me as a sociologist, I like to read into symbolic meaning. So for me, this is not his personal problem. This is a problem about lack of knowledge on campus and lack of ignorance on campus. This is a reality check for me. So I really like to see this meaningful conversation, translate into some kind of a meaningful action. So for example, I realized that Worcester State really try hard to promote diversity, right? I really like Stacy's statement. It's fabulous. She touched upon so many important issues. One of the issues is about representation. So for example, we do offer ethnic studies program. They have a lot of fabulous courses. However, there's no single one course just to focus on Asian Americans' history, culture, experience, period. Again, this is the reality of campus. And I offered a course called Asian Americans Experience 3 years ago. And the first time when I offered this course, only 7 students signed up. So my chair was very great. So she made an argument with the university saying that why, even though my course under enrollment, however, it should be offered, right? So it was offered first time, only 7 students. Then I offer same course next year, the following year, 3 years in a row. I didn't know how many students registered. However, it was always under enrollment. So again, this is reality about campus. And representation, yeah, we have great, program. And we have a lot of diversity courses. However, Asian Americans experience trickle down into one of diversity. I don't know where are they. And there's no single academic course about Asian American experience, it's a period. So unfortunately, this is a very common experience on campus, not just Worcester State, that's my point. Not just Worcester State, it happens so often, especially in the East Coast. We do not have a lot of Asian American population. And probably this is one of the reasons. And also Asian Americans, we have a reputation of being minority, right? I don't know what is some reason. However, I really wish after this meaningful conversation, we can translate our meaningful conversation into a social action rather than just talk about a problem, rather than just one of a check box and saying, hey, we had this event, hey, we did that. So I really like to see something more meaningful and some kind of change happening on campus. Again, I really like to thank you for people who organized this event. And also I'm really appreciate for Professor Martin Frohn's effort. And he was the first person initiated this letter about solidarity. As an Asian American, personally, I'm really grateful for everybody who participated in this process of organizing this dialogue. I really hope we're going to come up some meaningful action, not just talk about the problem. I think everybody know we have talked about racism for so long. However, what direction have we made any progress yet? I don't know. Personally, I'm really frustrated, especially under representation on campus at Worcester State. We have a diverse population. Really, it's great, fabulous. It's the first time for me to feel comfortable to teach at a higher, education. And however, I'm also very frustrated. We have so many fabulous programs and diversity, events, and Asian American experience trickle down to nowhere. that's a important point I try to make. Thank you.
Professor Wang, wow. Much appreciated. Thank you so much for that perspective. And I think you echo a lot of the concerns that we all have. And so I appreciate taking the issue and not making it visible. And you are correct, we can do better. And we should do better. And so we hope that we can also count on you to be able, as we look and audit our processes, that you can help us to unfold some of those parts. So I'd like to also invite anyone who's interested to find out more information about the Asian Heritage American minor. You can certainly contact a Professor Fromm within the history department. And also for those who also have any suggestions or would like to learn more about ethnic studies, as Professor Wang referred to, that is Professor Hardeep Sidhu, who's also you'll be hearing from a little bit later. But thank you so much for that. At this time, please welcome Shu Kiang.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I want to talk about my wishes and dreams as an immigrant from China. I cannot choose my genes. I cannot choose my skin color, but I did choose to live on this land called America because I believe the value of freedom and the value of justice. Dr. Martin Luther King told us, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. I want to say, yes, I have a dream too. I have a dream that one day in this nation, there will be only one type of race, which is American. I have a dream that one day we can be called and seen as American, not anything else. I have a dream that one day no hate is on the street, but only love and care. Thank you.
Thank you so much. At this time, I'd like to also make the space for one of our community members who's here with us from the Southeast Asian Coalition. So please welcome to our virtual stage, I would say professor, she is a professor, but our dear friend Anvu Sawyer.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Laxmi, Adam, and Worcester State University for organizing this very important solidarity gathering. This is Anh Vu Sawyer. I am a former Vietnamese refugee, and we serve immigrants and refugees from all over the world, about 12,000 visits every year, and our office is in Worcester. The Atlanta attack is not isolated, and sadly, Asian hate and all hates continue. The Southeast Asian Coalition of Central Mass will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Black Lives Matter and all BIPOC groups to fight for justice for all. The more hate thrown toward us, the stronger Asians become. I hope you all know that through history. In our Asian gentle and powerful way, with our arts, cultures, and even food, Asians will change the narrative to break hatred, to bring truth and healing to a very hurtful and broken American society. Professor Li Hua Huang's class will be a good start. So let's continue to make the US one of the greatest nations on earth, because we Americans are willing to have compassion for others and trust that they have an important part in making our country one of the greatest nations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and for being here. We appreciate all of your support and the work that you do within the community and just who you are as a model to many of us. Thank you. Please welcome Dr. Henry Thoreau.
Sorry, thanks, Lakshmi, and everyone else. I should start by saying I'm making a personal or scholarly statement, not an official, stating anything official from the administration. But that said, I believe that what I'll say is very much shared by many leaders on campus and is something they act on. And I know I can just add a little bit to the great things that have already been said, which have been powerful in different ways. I guess I'm here not in solidarity because as a white person, that sounds like somehow I'm lending a hand to Asian and Asian American folks from outside of an issue. As Adam Saltzman said, whites are on the inside of the issue. We're the cause of the problem. We're the and it's up to us to change white power, white culture, the structures of racism, the everyday behaviors, and so forth. I think the time has passed where white folks can put the burden of challenging racism, of changing racism, of stopping racism on the very people who are targeted by it. It's our problem and we need to deal with it. As a white person, I have work to do. I have sacrifices to make. And for whites who are not willing to do that, no amount of anti-racist rhetoric means anything if you're not willing to step up. And I'm not presenting myself as a model, because when I say I have work to do, I have work to do. I'm not someone who's done it already or accomplished anything significant. We often hear that kind of sentiment is unfair to white people. Many white people, haven't actively participated in violence against non-whites in the US and so forth. And just because of our skin color, we're grouped in with extremist racists and so forth. But if we really think about who racism is unfair to, it's unfair to people of color, right? Any unfairness to whites who sort of get caught up in the issue is a trivial unfairness. And we need to stop using a sort of position of privilege to pull ourselves out of the responsibility that we all have to deal with these issues. Honestly, I have to say it's time white folks need to toughen up and stop whining about all the little nuances of things we have to deal with and really step up and address a problem, as Professor Wang has said, that has gone on and been talked about and analyzed, for decades and centuries. There's no mystery at what needs to be done. There's no mystery that the problem exists. When we refuse to see it as white people, we're simply in denial of the everyday violence, of the structural problems and so forth. And we have to recognize how deep the problems are. As I speak to Asian American and Asian friends in recent times, they point out just how subtle a lot of the challenges are to stepping up against racism. It's been alluded to already. For some Asian sort of cultural backgrounds, even loud protesting, even political protest goes against cultural identity or practices. And we have to realize that the very way that we've set up what qualifies as anti-racist practice in the United States is culturally biased, and we need to change even that level of how we're approaching racism. Anyway, there's much more to say. I'm certainly not the best person to say it, but I appreciate being given an opportunity to speak today. Thank you, Lakshmi, and everyone else.
Thank you so much. Professor Josna Rege.
Thank you, Lakshmi, and heartfelt thanks to all the organizers of this event. It's good to be here today. I teach post-colonial world and ethnic American literatures in the English department, as well as in the ethnic studies, global studies, and women's studies programs. And I stand in solidarity with my beautiful Asian and Asian American students and my Asian and Asian American colleagues on the staff and faculty here. My family immigrated to the Boston area in 1970, 51 years ago, when I was in high school. Yes, I'm old as the Asian woman who was kicked to the ground and stomped on in New York City last week in broad daylight. I was the only person of Indian origin in my high school class of 2,000 students, and one of only a handful of Asian Americans. This was because it had been just 5 years since the 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act started allowing larger numbers of Asians into the US after nearly half a century of almost total Asian exclusion. In my college class, the situation was the same. I had a small number of Japanese and Chinese American classmates, but I was the only Indian, and only half Indian at that. about the different acceptance of the two halves of my heritage, Indian on my father's side, English on my mother's. Every time I speak, people will ooh and ah. I love your English accent. But the Indian accent is the butt of comedy, exemplified in Apu, the grocery store owner in The Simpsons. It was only a year ago that Hank Azaria, the white voiceover actor for Apu, finally stepped down under pressure and apologized to Indian Americans for the harm he had done to them. I feel sad and angry that my fellow Indian Americans have to feel ashamed of how they speak. I want to very quickly mention just 3 things that can't be repeated enough. 1, Asian Americans as unassimilable aliens. All immigrants are told to assimilate, and Asian Americans have tried hard to do just that. But racism has prevented us from being accepted as true Americans. How many Asian Americans whose families have been in this country for generations are told with surprise what good English they speak, or asked where they come from, and even when they answer, Worcester, Mass, they're asked again, where do you really come from? The clear message, you are an outsider. 2, Asian Americans as the model minority. The model minority myth was created in the 60s. Asian Americans, this stereotype said, was successful, hardworking, family-oriented, didn't make waves, and didn't ask for a handout. This propaganda was circulated in anonymous syndicated newspaper columns across the country and clearly pitted the new immigrants against African Americans who were struggling with the legacies of enslavement and Jim Crow segregation. Of course, in reality, for every Asian American surgeon general or tech company CEO, there are many, many Asian American taxi drivers, convenience store workers, motel cleaners, and nail salon workers. Last, stereotypes of Asian women. Asian women have long been exoticized and sexualized in the US. Until the hateful mass shooting in Atlanta last month, if you typed the words Asian woman into an internet search, you would get ads for porn and mail order brides. Small, quiet, and compliant, the way wives ought to be. Now, when you type in Asian women, you get pages of results about violence against us, and then the pages of porn and mail order brides. A couple of weeks ago, I attended a rally in my hometown of Amherst with the Asian and Asian American community coming out in force, children, women, and men, as well as townspeople of all ethnicities. Holding homemade banners, they spoke out about their daily humiliations as Asian Americans in this country, and the whole community stood with them in solidarity. As we stand together here at Worcester State today, let's stand up, speak out, and make waves together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those words, powerful. At this time, let's invite Professor Hardeep Sidhu.
Hi, everyone. I'm Professor Sidhu. I'm a professor in the English department and director of the Ethnic Studies program. I confess I had my initial reaction to the murders in Atlanta was a shared sense of rage that a lot of my fellow speakers today have spoken about. That very, very quickly gave way to a sort of deep sadness. And I had a really hard time talking about the murders afterwards. And I came to understand, I think part of what made me deeply sad was the discourse around the events and what that discourse revealed, both in terms of people's baseline assumptions and a lot of people's baseline ignorance about Asian and Asian American history. I think one thing that I'm talking about discourse and language that came not just from cops, but also from like the media, that happened on social media. It came from government officials, from leaders of institutions, and even as John Flowers mentioned a few minutes ago, from allies. Time and again, I think the thing that I noticed most often that frustrated me and made me most deeply sad was the way that Orientalism was basically reproduced in a lot of recent statements and conversations. Orientalism being the European and American construction of Asia and people of Asian descent as essentially different as permanently foreign and as lesser than an us or a we. And it's that us or that we that I noticed time and time again in statements of solidarity that didn't seem to understand often that Asians and Asian Americans are part of the us and part of the we. In the discourse, it often revealed a sort of assumption of who's presumed to belong, right? The term belonging is brought up earlier. And I think that was one of my deepest sort of frustrations over the past few weeks. And one of the things that made me, that gave me a hard time of knowing even how to engage. And so I didn't, I was kind of silent over the past few weeks about this as I sort of sorted through my thoughts. I'm really, really grateful to the organizers of this event for bringing together a group of really smart and thoughtful people to talk about these issues and express our solidarity. So, you know, a nudge, particularly to white folks and allies, to watch out for your us, watch out for your we. Who does this include and who does it exclude? And are you actually reproducing the thing that you think you're criticizing in your statements? You know, that's something that I'd like to throw out there. And also, I want to state my solidarity with the many, many Asian and Asian American communities that are bearing the brunt of this most recent wave of ignorance and animosity. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor. At this time, I'd like to invite Professor Katrona Stanfield.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, OMA, for organizing this and for our student leaders from TWA and the statements so far that have been really, really powerful. So I am a professor in the History and Political Science department, and I'm an immigrant. And I say that because as a white immigrant from Australia, I've benefited from these systems that pit some immigrants as more desirable than others. And I also speak as a feminist because, as Professor Sidhu was mentioning, often feminists, our we is not sufficiently inclusive. White feminists often dominate conversations about gender equality and ignore or talk over the concerns of women of color. So I wanted to sort of start by just restating, you know, who we're talking about here. And saying the names of the women that we lost in the Atlanta shooting. Dao Yufeng, Zhao Jitan, Delina Hyun Jung Grant, Sun Cha Kim, Sun Chung Park, and Yong Au. They were real people with full lives and families and people who loved them, who had dreams. And as many people have mentioned, this is just the latest in a series of events. But I want to point out that the wave of anti-Asian hate is also gendered, that we're talking not just about racism, but misogyny. According to Stop AAPI Hate, in the last year, 68% of the victims in reported hate crimes were women. Asian women are targeted 2.3 times more than Asian men. As Jia Yang Fan writes in The New Yorker, quote, misogyny and racism have never lived neatly in their separate categories. They ravage by mutually reinforcing a narrative of a dehumanized other. The bodies of Asian women in particular have long been objectified and abhorred, fetishized and exoticized. From the Page Act of 1875, which effectively prohibited Chinese women from immigrating to the US under the pretense that they could only be prostitutes, to the depictions on screen and in pop culture of the deviant dragon lady, Asian women have been hypersexualized and then demonized for their projected hypersexuality, end quote. And for the women in Atlanta, they were also victims of hatred for their perceived association with the sex trade. And I want to quote here from Red Canary Song, which is a New York-based collective of Asian advocates for massage parlor workers and sex workers. Quote, the women who were killed faced specific racialized, gendered violence for being Asian women and massage workers. They were subjected to sexualized violence stemming from the hatred of sex workers, Asian women, working class people, and immigrants, end quote. So I think that as we consider, our actions where we can stand in solidarity, we must continue to pay attention to the intersecting forms of oppression and hatred that we're seeing take place around us. I mourn these victims of anti-Asian violence and misogyny, and I urge everyone, particularly my white faculty and staff colleagues and my students, that any of our efforts in dismantling white supremacy also look at dismantling patriarchy, dismantling cis heteronormativity, that we're truly inclusive and recognize these intersecting forms of discrimination faced by our community members who are Asian or Asian American Pacific Islander. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have one more speaker, and this is a special message from our Director of Affirmative Action and Equal Opportunity. Please welcome Maria Garepi.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this, Lashmi and TWA. First and foremost, I would like to say that I stand in solidarity with my Asian American, and Pacific Islander colleagues, friends, family. I do have very close friends and family that are Asian, as well as with our students and families, as well as the broad campus community and the community members. In my position, I get to work very closely with those folks that I call the diversity, equity, and inclusion champions on campus. And I want to say that I deeply appreciate the work that you do. And I want to thank you for coming together for this event today to show where we stand as a university community. For everyone else, I also want you to know that we have ample opportunities for you to participate through the different committees that we have on campus. As General Counsel Stacy Luster mentioned some of them earlier, I would like to have the spotlight for just a minute on the work that the Campus Climate Committee does, because under very important leadership, this committee works collaboratively on an approach to evaluating diversity, equity, and inclusion on campus by using both quantitative and qualitative data so that we can plan for not only short-term, but also long-term initiatives. So this committee is currently working on our end of year or end of academic year report. And what we're planning on doing is incorporating any information that is currently being collected through the Campus Climate Survey and the feedback that we receive. So I want to say that, if you have any questions, concerns, please do not hesitate to email or call me, as well as Professor Flowers or AVP Mary Jo Marion, as we'd like to hear from you. But importantly, we also want to remind everyone to please complete that survey that was sent out recently, because we want to make sure we can take your experiences and responses into account with all that data that we're collecting. I also want to briefly mention, we do have a bias incident response team on campus that addresses incidents of bias. This committee works closely with other divisions and offices on campus to make sure we're promoting a safe and welcoming climate that's open to all. And again, I want to invite you to sharing and bringing forward any ideas, any ways to partner that you have for yourself and for any affinity groups on campus that you're part of. It can be a student club, an organization. Please don't hesitate to reach out to any of the committee leadership or myself. And I also want to remind all of our BIPOC faculty and staff that we do hold Cafecito, which is our affinity group that we started in the fall of 2020. And we're doing that on a regular basis. So if you would like to hear more about these, again, please email me. Thank you, Lashmi and TWA.
Thank you so much, Maria, and for the good work that you continue to center on our campus and create conversations and space for. We've reached the end of our program, but before we go, I'd like to first thank the members of our faculty, our students, and I'd like to just read their names and their departments, because for the students on this call, I want you to know who they are and seek them out and ask for their friendships, take their classes as Professor Dr. Wims mentioned in the chat. We hope that you would take some of our professors' classes on the topic for fall 2021. We know that advising is taking place right now. So allow me the opportunity to please give you the names of who participated today. So special thank you to Amaya Phillips, who is TWA Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month Committee Chair in Third World Alliance, a psychology major, class of 2022. Thank you to Dr. Wims for your leadership on our campus and for the topic. We thank Stacy Luster, General Counsel Assistant to the President. We thank Vina Lee, OMA Ambassador, Business Administration Major, class of 2024. And for our statements of solidarity, we thank Professor Ling Ling Wang from Business and Administration Department, Professor Wei Shu from the Chemistry Department, Professor Martin from the History Department, Anvu Sawyer, our community sister from Southeast Asian Coalition. Thank you so much for being here and for your continued support and collaboration with Worcester State University. Professor Adam Saltzman, Urban Action Institute and Urban Studies, Professor Jonathan Flowers, Philosophy Department, Professor Li Hua Wang from Sociology Department, Shu Qian, Teaching and Learning Librarian, Dr. Henry Thoreau, Associate Vice President for Academic Affairs, Professor Josna Rege, English Department, Professor Hardeep Sidhu from English Department, Professor Katrona Stanfield, Political Science Department, and a message from Maria Garapi from the Director of Affirmative Action and Equal Opportunity. We want to thank you. Thank our students and our faculty for your words and for sharing your experiences with our community today. We've heard where the hate and racism was first developed and stemmed from, the historical perspectives. We've heard about the importance of representation and leadership. We've heard from both our students and faculty about their experiences and what is much needed, which is action, what happens after this conversation. I echo the message from Dr. Wims again. Please, for our students to take courses on the topic for fall 2021. I ask that our entire community continue to have these conversations and keep this topic on the agenda and continue to hold our community accountable, as Professor Wang shared. While there is good and authentic work happening on our campus, we have to work equally in making sure that there's more and that we get it right. In the words of Evelyn Hudahart, who is retired now from Brown University from the Race and Ethnic Studies Department, who Worcester State brought about 10 years ago, she said, "Make us visible. Action is much needed." So I want to thank you for being here today and for supporting events like this and continuing to foster space and climate for our Asian brothers and sisters. Thank you so much, and you have a wonderful day.